Once again, it's Murder and Mayhem Monday. Welcome back. My name is Franklin James, the serial author. And yeah, I'm interested in diving into the minds of history's most dangerous serial killers, or at least taking a peek in and see what I can find. Now, today I want to talk about someone in particular. He's probably one of the country's most deadliest convicted serial killers. He was active throughout the 80s and the 90s. He was dubbed the Green River Killer. I'm talking about Gary Leon Ridgway. Now, if you are familiar with Gary Ridgway, do you know about his heinous crimes and the horrible shit he's done? I mean, there's a lot to unpack there psychologically. But if you aren't too familiar with him, I will do an overview of his life leading up to his arrest. Now, let's get into it. Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February 18th, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah. His parents were John and Mary Ridgway. His father was a bus driver. His mother was a sales clerk. He was the second born out of three sons. Now, according to relatives, he grew up in a very turbulent, unstable household and witnessed more than one violent argument between his parents. In fact, his mom was known to be very domineering, which tells me he likely experienced inconsistent childhood discipline. Now, this is when parents enforce rules differently and punish the same behavior differently. And that kind of confusion, along with the turmoil going on within his household, I think these things had a profound effect on him. He was probably experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety, as well as physical and emotional abuse. I mean, there was underlying things going on there because he was still wetting the bed up until he was 13 years old. And his mother didn't help this situation because he admitted she used to forcibly wash his genitals every time he wet the bed. And I get a parent wanting to clean their kid up a bit after they've had an accident in bed, right? Understandable. But from how he put it, it sounds like she was being a little too inappropriate and aggressive. I mean, if it wasn't embarrassing enough he wet the bed, now she has to humiliate him by forcibly washing his genitals, which I'm sure did wonders for his self esteem. But later in life, he admitted as an adolescent, he had conflicting feelings of anger and sexual attraction toward his mother. He also admitted that he often fantasized about killing her, which, coming from a psych background, I can see why, you know? She was abusing him, she was humiliating him, embarrassing him. And I'm sure all these things had an effect on his psyche. And who knows if his siblings were witnessing these things he was experiencing, right? You know, typically when you have siblings, you give each other shit. You know, that's just something you do. So who knows if they were, providing him with comfort or if they were making fun of him, making things worse. Either way, I can imagine in his eyes what his mom was doing just wasn't okay, right? She was supposed to be the one person to protect him and shield him from such behavior, not treat him that way herself. She wasn't being very motherly. And that's why he often fantasized about killing her. And that's why when he was 16 years old, he decided to attack and stab a 6-year-old boy, a boy that did nothing to him. But he admitted that he wanted to see how it felt to kill someone. So even at that young age, he was already showing signs of psychopathy. And I'm curious where his father was in all this, right? Did he turn a blind eye? Did he not care? Was he even around? Did he punish Gary just as harshly as his mom? I mean, I'm not trying to give him a pass because, I think he also had a hand in molding Gary into the man he became. I mean, Gary really doesn't go into much about what his father has done, not like he did with his mom. But what we do know is that his father despised prostitutes. He loathed them. He was a bus driver and he would frequently see them on his routes. And I can see Gary being young and hearing his father ranting and raving about his dislike for prostitutes. No, I think his father's attitude towards prostitutes definitely resonated with Gary and just affected his psyche in general. But I want you guys to remember that little tidbit, that hatred towards prostitutes. Now, before I go any further, I just want to say that I'm not trying to justify Gary Ridgway's actions by letting you know what happened to him during his childhood. The things that he did were horrible, they were inexcusable, but I can sympathize with a child that's going through any form of abuse, whether it be emotional or physical. I'm just trying to give you guys some context and kind of let you know that it takes a lot of ingredients to cook up a serial killer. Okay, so now let's jump back into the Gary Ridgway timeline. At this point, his family is now living in the state of Washington. They moved there when he was 11 years old from Salt Lake City, Utah. Now, academically, he was known to be a poor student. In fact, he was dyslexic and he was held back a grade. It was noted that he had a low IQ, but he did graduate high school back in 1969. He then marries his high school sweetheart, Claudia Craig, and enlists in the U.S. Navy, where he saw combat. And we know that in war, it's either kill or be killed. And if he did end up killing, he may have found that gratifying. I mean, he was always curious about it, right? I mean, war in general can have a profound impact on people who've experienced it, and it can be debilitating. But he might have relished it while he was there. Now, he only served a 2-year stint in the Navy, and once he came back home, he and his high school sweetheart Claudia Craig ended up getting a divorce. Apparently, Gary was having frequent sexual encounters with prostitutes while enlisted, and he ended up contracting an STD. I know, surprise, surprise. Gary Ridgway is fond of prostitutes, the same people his father deeply despised. I wonder what was going on there. But at the end of the day, infidelity ruined his marriage. And I wonder if he blamed prostitutes instead of taking accountability himself. He blamed the women. But his wife admitted that she also had an affair as well while he was gone, which I'm sure in his mind was far more harmful and disrespectful than his, right? This was the person he married. She was supposed to provide him with the love he never received from his mother, that he never received as a child. So her act of betrayal was far more damaging, which probably led to even more repressed anger toward women. But that doesn't stop Gary Ridgway from wanting to try again, and perhaps he was always searching for that love and that warmth he was missing. But he wouldn't have been able to feel those things because he was a psychopath, is a psychopath. But he tries again in 1973 and marries a woman named Marcia Brown, and they have a son, Matthew Ridgway. But that marriage doesn't last long either. It ends because of infidelity because Gary can't stop engaging with prostitutes. Now, it's interesting because Gary Ridgway would always complain about prostitutes being in his neighborhood, yet he couldn't stop being with them. And I question whether or not that was a learned behavior. I wonder if his father also experienced the same conundrum. Now, according to the woman that Gary Ridgway was with, he had an insatiable sexual appetite. He had urges that needed to be fulfilled, and he wanted them fulfilled several times a day. He needed it. In fact, he demanded it. And that sort of hypersexual behavior can be attributed to his upbringing and what happened to him when he was a kid. Those conflicting feelings he had toward his mother, that anger and that sexual attraction. His then wife, Marcia Brown, even stated that he wanted her to have sex with him in public places, wooded areas, locations where his victims' bodies were later found. And I think he wanted to do that because it would allow him to relive what he did to those victims, to get lost in those feelings and those sensations, which would have made sex with his wife even more gratifying, at least in his mind, which is deeply disturbing. But I also found it interesting because apparently he became a religious man during his second marriage. It was said that after certain sermons, he would cry, he would read his Bible aloud at work. He worked for a truck painting company. He would even go door to door attempting to spread the gospel. Yet he couldn't stop giving in to his sexual desires. And perhaps he turned to religion to try to help put an end to his deviant ways, his hypersexual behavior. Maybe he felt ashamed of himself and maybe he was lost and morally he knew it was wrong, but he couldn't stop doing it. Or maybe he was just a psychopath and did those things to blend in and appear normal, reading the Bible to try to justify his actions. I mean, his then wife said he tried to use it to manipulate her. I mean, these are things psychopaths do. Now, what blows my mind is that Gary Ridgway admitted to having his son with him during the times he murdered women. And he said if his son had any inkling of what was going on, he would have killed him too to silence him, which is insane. I mean, this man didn't even care about his own kid. His needs far outweighed the lives of the people in his life. But why would he show his son care and love if he never received those things himself? But ultimately, his marriage to Marsha Brown ended in 1981, and he didn't get married again until 1988. And that was to a woman named Judith Lynch. Personally, I feel as though by the time Gary Ridgway met Judith Lynch, he had evolved and improved, so to speak, just by the way he carried himself, the way he murdered his victims, the way he presented himself to others. He had gotten better at hiding his true nature, wearing that mask to not raise suspicion, at blending in. And I say this because Judith stated that Gary Ridgway was a loving and attentive husband. He was a devout churchgoer and a dedicated worker at the truck painting company. She had no idea about his dark side or the heinous crimes he was committing. She had no idea he was the Green River Killer. He was dubbed the Green River Killer because that's where he dumped the bodies of his first five victims in Green River in the state of Washington. Now, because of the advancement of technology and DNA matching, they were able to connect him to multiple victims. And he was arrested finally on November 30th, 2001. And he confessed to killing 48 women, but he also stated it got to a point where he lost count, which is just disgusting and horrible, his complete disregard for human life. Now, it's also stated that he was active throughout the 80s and the 90s, but I think it's evident that he was also killing during the 70s as well. But Gary Ridgway was found guilty on 49 counts of aggravated first degree murder, tampering with evidence, and solicitation. He's now serving 49 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. So essentially, they've locked him up and thrown away the key, and for good reason. Gary Ridgway is a malignant, sexually motivated, sadomasochistic serial killer. He enjoyed strangling his victims by wrapping his forearm around their necks. And the act of strangulation in itself, it's intimate, it's up close. It gives him the opportunity to feel his victims' bodies, to witness their terror. He's in control of their lives, and that's sexually arousing for him. It's gratifying. And essentially, it's symbolic matricide, right? He often fantasized about killing his mother. So instead of doing that, he has these women take her place. He would even go back to dump sites where he left his victims to commit necrophilia. Again, to relive what he's done, right? To experience those feelings and those sensations all over again. And now there's a lifeless body and it's unresisting. He can truly be himself now and do whatever he wants. Or there could be some unconscious hostility there, repressed hostility toward a parental figure that he's now taking out on someone else, on a victim, in his case, by ravishing the dead. I think much of his hypersexual sadomasochistic behavior stemmed from his childhood and his conflicting feelings he had toward his mother. But I also feel like his time in the war also had effect on him as well. I mean, he targeted sex workers and runaways. He even stated that he wanted to kill as many sex workers as possible. He said he had a strong hatred toward them, yet he couldn't stop engaging with them sexually. This guy had conflicting ideologies his entire life. But he also said he chose sex workers because they might not be reported missing. So he was smarter than he let people believe, smarter than what people thought. And he chose runaways because they were vulnerable, right? And if they're missing, who's going to flat out think someone's murdered right away? As far as anyone knows, they just ran away from home. And he used that to his advantage. Out of the FBI's organized and disorganized serial killer category, I think Gary Ridgway would fall under organized. He possessed a controlled mood during his offending. He had a family, and yet he was still able to commit his heinous crimes. He was socially competent. He was charming. In fact, he would carry around a photo of his son and used it to obtain a lot of his victims. He wanted to look like the loving father. He would also watch the news, which was evident by the way he altered different crime scenes. He would make it look like his victims were shot. He would leave cigarette butts around so it looked like the killer was a smoker. I mean, Gary Ridgway was a planner. He loved being in control and knew exactly what he was doing. Gary Ridgway is a textbook psychopath and one of the country's deadliest convicted serial killers. And right now, he's where he should be, behind bars. But I thank you guys for tuning in. And I do ask that you smash that like button and subscribe. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about Gary Ridgway. Share this video out there, hit that bell for notifications, and you guys be safe. Take care.